Personally, Sammy said, I thought all that stuff Paul and some of the other bosses said about no drugs was bullshit. Stay out of it because drug dealing gave Cosa Nostra a bad name? People want to buy drugs. How can you stop it? The real problem was guys in the family doing drugs. When a guy's dealing drugs, you can talk to him, reprimand him. You don't have to kill him. In my crew, when I was captain, there was no drug dealing. But drugs were everywhere you looked. One of the guys with me, Nicky Cowboy, got hooked on crack cocaine. He became like a renegade. I couldn't take a chance on him running around. He knew too much. So I got permission from John to kill him. We dumped the body in a vacant lot. The same thing happened with Mike the Bat. I think Nicky got him hooked on crack. He went crazy. I lost control of him. I tried to talk to him, but he's too far gone. He ain't listening. I got John's permission. I decided Mike would be killed in Tallies, and to leave him there to make it seem to the cops that the murder was because of a robbery, so nobody would think that it was related to Cosa Nostra. In addition, a series of hits was ordered by Gotti, which Sammy either supervised or set up, that received scant, if any, press attention. Sammy had a marginal role in two other murders. One was the execution of Willie Boy Johnson for informing, despite Gotti's oath on his dead son that Johnson had nothing to worry about. John discussed how it should go, using me to bounce off ideas about the best way to do it. That was my only involvement. John gives the contract to one of the shooters in the Castellano hit. Willie Boy has a construction job, plus he's dealing drugs. We caught him with 13 bullets in the head early one morning. When I say we, it's because legally I guess I was part of the we. As consigliere and then underboss, I wasn't supposed to be doing these hits or getting into the details of them, but the truth was that if I was him, I would have picked me. I was efficient at what I did. I was probably the best hitman in the family. When John Gotti wanted you dead, he wanted you dead yesterday. That way he could walk around and look like he's so fucking ferocious. By the end of 1989, Gotti, in his meteoric rise to stardom, had eclipsed the fame of any Cosa Nostra figure in history, with the possible exception of Al Capone. Besides his appearance on the cover of Time magazine, he had been on the cover of the New York Times Sunday magazine, People, and New York. The men's fashion magazine GQ featured him in its pages. Newspaper stories about him were a common occurrence. Television crews followed him constantly. During all of this, although Sammy the Bull Gravano was generationally part of a new, younger breed of show-off mobsters, he remained bound to traditional Cosa Nostra values, hugging the shadows and avoiding the limelight at all costs, never calling undue attention to himself. I paid him homage too, but I'm not a jerk-off about it. When he was walking, he didn't like anybody in front of him, so I walked a slight step behind him. When it was raining, I held the umbrella. When he goes to a car, I open the door for him. I was showing guys how to conduct yourself around the boss. It was about respect. John just fell in love with himself. He went past having a big ego. You're talking now about an egomaniac. He was always talking about his public. He was completely and totally in love with himself. Of course, John worked at it real hard. That whole image of himself, being the boss, the godfather, the Don, the Dapper Don, the Teflon Don. He loved them terms. If that news guy would have went to John first and told him, I'm going to call you the Dapper Don, I think John would have given him a couple of $100,000 right on the spot. That's why all the old foxes in Cosa Nostra hated him. It wasn't the life. Just like when we said Paul Castellano was being selfish about money, this was equally selfish. Because it was for me. It wasn't for Cosa Nostra. Cosa Nostra was supposed to be family, not me. John didn't realize this was going to blow up in his face. All right, you won a battle. You look great on television. Fuck the battle. It's not the battle, it's the war. That was obvious to me all my life. John wins a battle or two, he's the Teflon Don. But you can't win a war against the government the way he was doing it. Maybe he thought he was some sort of Robin Hood with the people cheering him on. Hey, what is this? All of a sudden, we're really the good guys? I don't think I'm Robin Hood. I think I'm a gangster. That's the life I chose. That's the road I took. I told him once, maybe it wasn't such a good idea flaunting our life. No, Sammy, he said. Don't worry about it. You'll see. This will be okay. We're going to change the face of Cosa Nostra. We're going to show everybody how to do it. Gotti required the acting underboss, Frankie Locascio, and Sammy to be at the Ravenite 5 evenings a week. The crew captains had to come in at least once weekly. Sammy said, the government didn't have to go anywhere to find us. Just focus on the club. John's bringing every captain and every new guy in the family down there. They'll see who kisses who talks to who gets the handshakes. John gave the government the entire family and then some, other people and other families, on a silver platter. I told him, John, why are we meeting in the club? They're all outside. Cops, state guys, federal guys. What are we doing here? Why? Listen to me, Sammy, he'd say. I know what I'm doing. Fuck the government. They're nothing. Don't worry about it. Okay, I'd say. Fuck the government. The boss is the boss. The boss's word is the final word. Right, wrong, or indifferent, he's the boss. Then Sammy unexpectedly saw a side to John Gotti so mean-spirited that even he was left searching for answers. After the first heroin trafficking case against Angelo Ruggiero, Gene Gotti, and John Cornelia ended in a mistrial because of jury tampering, Ruggiero remained in federal detention, his bail still revoked for the second trial. This also resulted in a mistrial, again for suspected jury tampering. For the third trial in 1989, Ruggiero was finally released on bail and severed from the case. He had terminal lung cancer. Gene Gotti and John Cornelia were both convicted and sentenced to 50 years. Then I heard John wants to whack out Angie. For what? I asked. For his fucking big mouth on them fucking tapes, he says. Look at the trouble he caused. I said, John, he's dying of cancer. Let him die that way. We look like fucking animals here. Finally he says, okay, I'm not going to do nothing. Don't worry about it. So John breaks Angie as captain and put him on a fucking shelf so bad he didn't even go to the hospital to visit him. I literally had to drag him to the funeral. John wanted to send Angie out with nobody, with no respect, nothing. And I'm talking about a lifelong thing, like from when they were 5, 6 years old. For more than a year and a half now, a bug had been operating inside the Ravenite Club. Now and his lead assistant, George Gabriel, had listened to some 600 hours of tapes. There had not been a single useful conversation. Wise guys had learned never to talk about any subject of importance in their social clubs. But the initial bugging of the Ravenite finally paid off in dramatically unexpected fashion. Out of stubbornness, Mao and Gabriel kept listening to the tapes over and over again, and finally discerned something that previously had escaped their notice. It was what was not being heard. On occasion, John Gotti's voice would be unaccountably missing for as long as an hour. Where was he? Logs of Ravenite comings and goings did not show him exiting the club. The Ravenite was on the ground level of a Mulberry Street tenement. It had its own entrance. There was a second entrance for the rest of the building. Inside the tenement, another door connected the club to the adjoining hallway. Was Gotti conducting meetings in the hallway? It seemed unlikely. Then Gabriel developed an informant who confided that when Gotti had something important to discuss, he retreated to the apartment upstairs. Now discovered that a now-deceased Gambino family soldier named Michael Cirelli had lived in a third-floor apartment currently occupied by Cirelli's aging widow. Prosecutors in the Brooklyn U.S. Attorney's Office obtained court authorization to place bugs in the hallway and the apartment itself. The results were beyond anything Mao could have hoped for. After 10 frustrating years of trying to cut off the head of the dominant Cosa Nostra crime family in America, success was at hand. There were 5 recorded sessions in the apartment, dating from November 30th, 1989 to January 24th, 1990, when the bug stopped functioning. But it didn't matter. On the tapes, Gotti had clearly identified himself as the head of a racketeering criminal enterprise, the Gambino family. He was heard announcing his intention to promote Sammy to official underboss of the family. Locascio would be shifted to acting consigliere. And on the most crucial tape, recorded on December 12, 1989, he acknowledged that he had ordered the murders of Robert Di Bernardo, Louis Melito, and Louis De Bono. If there was a disappointment on these tapes, it was a Gotti reference to the Castellano hit. With Frank Locascio present, he said to Sammy, "Probably the cops killed Paul, but whoever killed him, he deserved it." Amazingly enough, all those directly involved in murdering Castellano had honored their vow never to admit it, even among themselves. "I remember that wink, that little smirk John had when he was saying that," Sammy said. "Our little joke with Frankie." A turf battle broke out over the issue of who would next prosecute Gotti. The main combatants were Andy Maloney, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District, which embraced Brooklyn and Queens, and the Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau. It was understood that Gotti had to be charged with the Castellano hit. The case was too high profile. A decision was finally made. The case would go to the Eastern District, to Maloney and his chief of the Organized Crime Section, John Gleason. A grand jury was secretly convened. Sealed indictments were returned against Gotti, Sammy, and Frank Locascio. The arrests took place on December 11th, 1990. Handcuffed, Sammy and the others were taken to the FBI's New York headquarters. Frank Sparrow and Matty Tricorico drove Sammy. They adopted a laid-back manner. They didn't exhibit a triumphant gotcha attitude. When a prisoner was held in detention, all his personal effects, except for a minimal amount of cash, were taken from him and not returned until he was released. The two agents offered to bring Sammy's valuables to his wife. He accepted. He gave them the wad of $100 bills he was carrying, keeping only $30 to open a jailhouse account along with his watch and jewelry. Then he and the others were driven to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, again separately. Sparrow and Tricorico decided to take Sammy in a back way, to spare him the onslaught of photographers and television cameramen flocking around the MCC to record Gotti's arrival. They almost made it to an interior garage, but a crunch of cars forced them to walk the last few yards. That was when a video picture of Sammy, flanked by the two agents, was taken. The cameraman, pointing at Sammy, had yelled, "Is he one of the guys who was arrested?" Sparrow would always remember Sammy answering, "No, I got these two guys under arrest. I got everything under control." The indictments were announced the following day. The multiple RICO racketeering counts included illegal gambling, loan sharking, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to murder, and murder. Only Gotti was charged in the murders of Paul Castellano and Tommy Bellotti. All three defendants were placed in the harshest part of the Metropolitan Correctional Center, a ninth-floor area designated Total SEP. "The whole ninth floor is maximum security. The Total SEP is the maximum of the maximum," said Sammy. "In Total SEP, there were roaches, rats, whatever, running all over. Everybody's alone in a cell with a steel door and a little slot in it that opens up. They allow you an hour to come out and take a shower and walk up and down a hall if you feel like it." At the request of the defense, a bail hearing on December 21st was closed to the public and the press by the trial judge, U.S. Eastern District Judge I. Leo Glasser. "John told Frankie Locascio and myself that we should all intimidate the judge, glare at him to show how tough we are, be real aggressive in our attitude. I told John, I know the judge. I said to John, he's a tough-minded judge, but he's fair. Why antagonize him? But John don't listen. He gives the judge his look, and Judge Glasser stares right back. He wasn't intimidated. He denies bail, and we're back in our cells." The
December 21st bail hearing forever changed the relationship between John Gotti and Sammy Gravano. To demonstrate the high risk the defendants presented to society, Prosecutor John Gleason played excerpts of the Chirelli apartment tapes. It was the first time Sammy learned of their existence. He was mesmerized by the tapes, especially the critical tape of December 12, 1989, which recorded a meeting between Gotti and Locascio that he had not attended. The spin Gotti put on the hits enraged Sammy. The tapes portrayed Gotti as a long-suffering boss, saddled with a mad dog killer who hounded him to obtain authorization for hits until he finally threw up his hands and bowed to Sammy's wishes. That wasn't all. The December 12th tape, Sammy would learn, contained more of Gotti's non-stop diatribe against him. Every time he turned around, Sammy had some new business he hadn't known anything about. Gotti would compare Sammy to Paul Castellano, who had sold out the Borgata for a fucking construction company. Where? Where's my piece of these companies? Sammy, said Gotti, was creating a fucking army inside an army. I'm not going to allow that. Locascio suggested that Sammy might be downstairs in the Ravenite. Why didn't you bring him up so all of this could be threshed out? No, Gotti exclaimed. I'm going to see him tomorrow, and I'm going to talk to him tomorrow. Tomorrow, of course, never came. As some of these excerpts boomed in the courtroom, Sammy glanced at Gotti. He ain't looking at me, Sammy said. Only his fingers on his right hand are drumming on the table. They say when I'm really mad, my eyes turn blank, kind of glassy. I guess some of the court officers caught what I was feeling. It was all, I kind of looked at him, and he finally said, "You're disturbed?" And I said, "Fucking A, I'm disturbed. I think we gotta talk about these tapes." There's no more conversation, because we're put right back in total sep. The main defense lawyers, Bruce Cutler and Jerry Schogel, finally obtained a court order from Judge Glasser to have the defendants moved out of total sep into the general jail population. Now Gotti, Sammy, and Locascio could talk to one another. Sammy waited in vain for Gotti's explanation of what he had said on the December 12th tape. Instead, Gotti informed Sammy and Locascio that they would not be permitted to listen to the tapes. Nor would either of them be able to meet with their attorneys except in Gotti's presence. Gotti and Cutler would mastermind their mutual defense. Sammy had retained Schogel, whose legal expertise he admired. But then he learned to his dismay that Judge Glasser had disqualified not only Cutler, but Schogel as defense attorneys for the trial. Bugs in the hallway adjacent to the Ravenite had shown them to be house counsels for the Gambino family. Worse yet, on one of the Cirelli apartment tapes, Gotti, ranting about legal fees, had said, "Gambino crime family? This is the Schogel-Cutler crime family." Gotti eventually settled on a renowned Brooklyn-born attorney, Albert Krieger. For Sammy, he chose a former Manhattan assistant DA named Benjamin Brathman. Clearly, John Gleason, a deceptively low-key, scholarly graduate of the University of Virginia Law School, was proving to be a formidable adversary. Moreover, Gleason had a special interest in John Gotti. He'd been an assistant to Diane Giacalone in her ill-fated prosecution of Gotti. Gotti's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. He invited Sammy to have a man-to-man discussion about what he had said on the December 12th tape. It didn't get very far. His explanation was that he was upset by all of Sammy's business ventures. "It was your fault," he said. Sammy didn't argue. "What was the point?" he said. "It was done. The government had the tape already." But when he asked for permission to seek a severance so that he could attempt a defense without directly contradicting Gotti, Gotti refused. "We're all in this together," he said. "I gotta think of the future of the family. I gotta think of the future of Cosa Nostra. I gotta think of my public." Sammy said, "All John had to do was come to me once during the 11 months we were in there together and say, 'Sammy, I'm sorry. My big fucking mouth got you indicted, number one. Number two, let's try to get a severance for you so you could fight your case. Fuck the public.
let's try to fight this so that one of us, all of us, a couple of us, get out of this fucking mess. If he'd done that, I would have never cooperated with the government, not in a million years. And if I lost everything, I would have taken myself the fuck out. If I could hit somebody else, which I did plenty, I could definitely hit myself for the right reason. Instead, it's I still can't listen to the tapes, I can't speak to my own lawyer. He's saying, you have no defense. Look what you made me do. Look how mad you got me saying stupid things that ain't even true. It just got worse and worse. He's telling me it's my fault. That gets me thinking. No apologies, no severance, I got no defense. He don't say point blank to me, you gotta take the weight. But now I can see that's what he's setting me up for. He sees that December 12th tape could be to his benefit and go against me. If it's played right, the jury could look at John as the boss, and the poor John has lost control of this Sammy the Bull, his underboss. This Sammy has run rampant, and John's on tape actually complaining about it. Maybe with his personality, his charisma, with movie stars coming into court and waving at him, the jury would think that he's not such a bad guy, and the real monster here is Sammy, so let's convict him. Comes October, and I'm still not even thinking of cooperating. It's my whining brother-in-law, Eddie Gravano, who puts the idea in my head. He comes in for a visit, whining, Sammy, you're gonna go down in this case. I said, what do you suggest, Eddie? He says, I hate to say this, Sammy, but maybe you should cooperate, eh? I'll go with you. Me and you cooperate, and we'll go into a whole other life. Take our families and run after it's over. Cooperate? That's what you think we should do? Yeah, we have no other choice. I said, Eddie, I'll think about it. You hit me with something I never thought about in my life. And it's true. But back in my cell, I say to myself, this could be a real possibility. It'll be a real rough road. Well, what the fuck would my wife think? My kids? Would I shatter their lives? Would people try to hurt them? That thought went out of my mind because other guys cooperated and we never ever considered hurting their families. While I'm considering all of this, we have a meeting with the lawyers. I make another pitch to try and go for a severance. John says, Sammy, a severance? I told you. What would my public think? I said, you want me to do the rest of my life in prison without even trying to fight for myself because of what the public may think? John says, Sammy, you've got to understand this. It's not about me now. Everything has to be to save Cosa Nostra, which is John Gotti. You got a problem with that? On October 10th, Sammy sent word to the two FBI agents he was sure he could count on to keep his intent confidential, Frank Sparrow and Matty Tricorico. The message was that he wanted to talk to them. They immediately informed their supervisor, Bruce Mao, who brought the electrifying news to Prosecutor John Gleason. The news simply bowled John Gleason over. He had observed Gotti and Sammy side by side in court, and Gleason had no doubt that the truly tough guy, the true gangster, was Sammy. Gleason's immediate question was, what did Sammy want in return? Mao relayed the answer: complete immunity. That was impossible, Gleason replied. The best Gleason could do was to hold out the hope of a 20-year cap on any prison sentence, and he could not guarantee that. It would depend not only on the judge, but also on the quality of Sammy's testimony and how well he delivered it. The word came back that the conditions Gleason had outlined were acceptable to Sammy. The next problem was how to meet with him without Gotti's knowledge. Defense counsel gave Gleason the opening he needed by refusing to stipulate that the voices on the apartment tapes were Gotti's, Sammy's, and Lucasio's. Gleason obtained a court order requiring voice analysis tests. The three defendants were scheduled on 3 successive days. Sammy was the last, on October 24th. I was just told that they would reach out to me soon, Sammy said. Then when this voice bullshit comes up, I figured this has to be it. I go over to the court in Brooklyn. My lawyer Braffman is there. I do the test. Braffman leaves. I'm taken down to go back to jail. There's a couple of guys from the Lucchese family in the bullpen waiting to go back too. Then the marshal comes by and he says, "Gravano, they want you back upstairs." The Lucchese guy said, "What do they want you for?" I said, "I probably forgot to sign something. Who knows with these fucking bums?"
Waiting in the room for Sammy were Gleason and agents Mao, George Gabriel, Frank Sparrow, and Manny Tricorico. The first thing Sammy said was, "I want to switch governments." This left Gleason somewhat nonplussed. He wasn't then aware that Cosa Nostra considered itself a second government. Gleason had two concerns. One was that Sammy might try to downplay his criminality. Second, even worse, he might try to tell them what he thought they wanted to hear. Gleason's fears immediately evaporated. Sammy at once confessed to participating in 18 or 19 murders. The government had no idea of his involvement in most of them. Sammy had no legal representation, which could be a problem for Gleason later on. And Sammy certainly didn't want Braffman present, because Gotti would learn what was afoot. Gleason asked Sammy if he wanted Judge Glasser to appoint counsel for him. Sammy agreed. Glasser was immediately contacted and joined the meeting, where Sammy's request was formally recorded. No one wanted Sammy to return to the detention center. Despite all the precautions, there still could be a leak. Why risk it? But Sammy insisted that he needed at least 2 weeks to get his affairs in order and to inform his wife and children about what he was doing. He also wanted time to gird himself for what lay ahead.
"I needed some time to think," Sammy said. "This is the most major thing I've ever done in my entire life. It's something that I've never even thought of doing. It wasn't that I was going to change my mind. Once I decide to go forward, that's it. But I needed time to breathe, relax, just think about everything."
Still, everyone in the room was concerned about what might happen to him if he returned to the detention center.
"Well, if it does," said Sammy the Bull, "I guess the deal's off." When Eddie is in for another visit, I told him, and he double-crosses me. He backs out. He ain't coming along. Eddie's a schemer, a wheeler-dealer, a conniver. Maybe he starts thinking that there's no heat in his ass, really. And he has second thoughts. Fuck this. Why should I take off? I could badmouth Sammy, grab some of his construction business. That was Eddie. He's looking at every angle.
The hardest moments for Sammy were with his wife and children.
I called them to come to see me, my wife and my daughter, not my son, who was only 14. I told them I was going to cooperate. Debbie says, "No." She's shocked. She's scared. She's everything. My daughter is hysterical. Her idol, her father, is about to join forces with the enemy. She's crying, "No, Dad, please," and she runs right into the visitor room. My wife's eyes are full of tears. She says, "I have to tell you, Sammy, I'm not going into any witness protection program. I'm not going to be part of this." I said, "Dad, I understand your position and I respect it. You're a mother, not a gangster. You do what you gotta do, and I'll understand it 100%. She gives me a hug, and she leaves. My heart was breaking. But I know in my gut that for the first time in my life, I'm finally doing the right thing. I wasn't turning back.
Around midnight on November 8th, Sammy was removed from the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The pretext was that he was being transferred to a federal prison. Sammy was transported under heavy guard to the FBI's training academy at the U.S. Marine Base in Quantico, Virginia. There, Gleason and Sammy hammered out the deal agreement, subject to Judge Glasser's approval. Gleason found Sammy to be smart, engaging, and a hard bargainer. Sammy tried, and failed, to get the maximum duration of his potential sentence reduced from 20 to 10 years. But he did achieve two important points. One was a 2-year cap on his availability as a government witness. He wanted to avoid, if possible, testifying against any of his old crew. A good faith compromise was reached. If through no fault of the government a case it wished to prosecute had not been brought to trial before the 2 years were up, Sammy would cooperate. Otherwise, the decision to testify would be solely Sammy's. As for the second point, Gleason had to hand it to Sammy. He wanted Judge Glasser to sign off on the agreement immediately. Gleason perceived what was going through Sammy's mind. What if Glasser became incapacitated? Another judge might reject the whole package. Judge Glasser granted his approval. Shortly after Sammy's decision became public, on November 12, 1990, a campaign of vilification was launched. Gotti's allies and lawyers took frantic steps to influence potential jurors. Stories were leaked that Sammy was an untrustworthy closet homosexual, a womanizer, a drug dealer and addict, a demented serial killer. Flyers were distributed picturing a loathsome rat with his head on it, a portrait reprinted in the city's tabloids. Tabloid columnists, television commentators, and radio talk show hosts focused on the rat aspect of Sammy's decision. The FBI's Jim Fox was especially angered by some of the media coverage Sammy was getting. Fox had spent most of his career in foreign counterintelligence during the Cold War. Whenever we got a Soviet defector, he told me, he was treated like a hero, a guy who had seen the light and now was doing the right thing. Yet Cosa Nostra had done far more damage to the well-being of the United States than the Soviet Union ever did. And here was Gotti being portrayed as some sort of folk hero, and Sammy as a Judas. It didn't make any sense. Where were our values? The trial of Gotti and Locascio got underway on February 12, 1991, with an opening statement by U.S. Attorney Andy Maloney. Prompted by Gotti's Brioni double-breasted suits, brightly patterned silk ties, and matching pocket squares, Newsday instituted a daily artist-illustrated fashion watch in its coverage under the heading, Today's Gotti Garb. Sammy's testimony began on March 2nd. Sparrow and Tricorico were on hand to supply moral support, so was Jim Fox. I was in this back room with them, Sammy said. There's a recess, and Gleason comes on and said, we're calling out in a couple of minutes. Of course, I was nervous. I've been reading all this stuff about me like I'm a rat, I'm a traitor. I'm confused. Which side of these reporters on? Then I'm called, and I walked through that door into court. You could literally hear a pin drop. I walked in there, and it's wall-to-wall people. I saw John and Frankie at the defense table. I took the oath, and I sat in the witness chair. That first day, John was sitting straight up, not a hair out of place, the big boss. My last day, John ain't so erect anymore. He was slumping down. His hair's a little messy. His tie is crooked. I think he knew he was beat. For 3 days, Gleason led Sammy step by step through his life of crime, his life in Cosa Nostra, his life with John Gotti. Sammy was next subjected to 5 days of withering and futile cross-examination by Gotti's attorney Krieger and Locaccio's lawyer Anthony Cardinale. The father of Gleason's dedicated, savvy lead assistant prosecutor Laura Ward was a federal judge. He dropped in periodically. In all my years on the bench, he told his daughter, I've never seen a better witness. On April 2nd, after only 13 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gotti guilty of all the racketeering and murder counts against him. Locaccio was found guilty of racketeering, racketeering conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit murder. Both Gotti and Locaccio received life sentences without parole. By the time Sammy the Bull Gravano was sentenced on September 26, 1994, he was responsible for the conviction, guilty pleas, or extended prison terms of dozens of key Cosa Nostra figures. The conviction of the corrupt juror in Diane Giacalone's failed prosecution of Gotti, and a New York criminal intelligence cop who had been feeding investigative information to Gotti, as well as for the guilty pleas of 8 top trade union officials for labor racketeering. In the Gambino family alone, in addition to the convictions of Gotti and Mocascio, 7 captains were in prison on murder and assorted racketeering counts. The bosses of the Colombo family and New Jersey's De Cavalcanti family, the Genovese family underboss, and the Colombo family consigliere were also convicted, as well as a Genovese captain and 2 Lucchese captains. In addressing Judge Glasser regarding Sammy's law enforcement contributions, John Gleason noted the unique ripple effect of Sammy's testimony. With respect to all previous cooperators, Gleason said, there was no ripple effect in the organized crime community. The take on that was there's something wrong with the guy. What we heard was that when Salvatore Gravano cooperated, it did not indicate that there was something wrong with Salvatore Gravano, but that there was something wrong with the mob. It was very much a turning point. As a result, Gleason said, a veritable flood of cooperating witnesses had stepped forward, including both the acting boss and underboss of the Lucchese family. Gravano, he told Glasser, has rendered extraordinary, unprecedented, historic assistance to the government. Before passing sentence, Judge Glasser took pains to note, I can't recall seeing any reference to Gravano that wasn't preceded by words such as rat, snitch, turncoat, or some other pejorative word. Is assisting the government to bring major criminals to book a contemptible thing? Is it somehow less commendable because the informant was himself a member of that band of criminals? And yet, who can provide the information necessary to convict, if not one privy to that information? Glasser seconded the opinion of a federal agent that Sammy's decision to testify was the bravest thing I have ever seen. The judge sentenced Sammy to 5 years, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Sammy returned twice more as a witness. One appearance was at a sanity hearing for Chin Gigante. After 6 years of differing views from psychiatrists, the government had finally moved for a definitive verdict. Sammy sealed Gigante's fate with one succinct comment. Asked if he would have met and discussed sensitive Cosa Nostra business with a man he believed to be crazy, he replied, no, because if I thought he was crazy, how would I know what he was doing? He could walk right into a police station after the meeting. The presiding judge subsequently ruled that Gigante was fit to stand trial on racketeering and murder charges. As of this writing, released from prison, Sammy is out there, somewhere. He is on his own. He has left the witness protection program. His wife has divorced him. She sold their home and other property and moved away from New York City with their children. With his new identity, he is determined to create a new life for himself. He has found legitimate employment. Now 52, he has the body of a man 20 years his junior. He works out religiously. He has abandoned cigarettes for cigars. At day's end, he sometimes relaxes with a martini. He has never testified against members of his old crew. Occasionally he wonders if they're aware of this. He would be delighted, however, to testify against his brother-in-law, but he never will because of his sister. How I could have put Cosa Nostra ahead of loyalty to my wife and my kids is something I'll always have to live with, he says. All my life, growing up, I thought that people who went to school, put their noses to the grindstone, were nerds, taking the easy way out. I know now that I was the one who took the easy way, that I didn't have the balls to stay in school and try. That was the tough road, which I didn't take. They say I broke the oath, but it wasn't the oath I thought I was taking. I thought it was about honor and brotherhood. I mean, when you took the oath, that honor stuff got you as high as a kite when you were being made. You really believed in it, that it was worth living for and dying for and going to jail for. It was none of that. It was all about greed and power. In reality, it was a total joke. At least my own kids know now what the life really is. I hope other kids will realize it too, from my experience, Sammy said. I asked Sammy how concerned he was about his physical safety.
A lot of guys in the program, he said, look over their shoulder every minute. A coward dies 1,000 deaths. A man only dies once. I'm not saying some kid won't try and make a name for himself taking me out, but if it happens, I'm only going to die once, not 1,000 times. And this kid, whoever he may be, better be good.
In a symbolic effort to wipe away his past, Sammy underwent a painful, nearly year-long medical process to remove the intricate tattoos acquired in his hoodlum youth. Only one has resisted complete elimination: a small head of Christ on his arm.
I guess God still wants me, he joked.
We hope you've enjoyed this program from Harper Audio. To order additional cassettes or to receive a complete catalog of Harper Audio and Cadman titles, please call us at 1-800-331-3761. That's 1-800-331-3761. Thank you.